"Think you can survive us all?" she whispered, the cold steel of her Colt pressed against his jaw. Outside, the 1883 Montana blizzard howled. Inside his isolated barn, 3 desperate, heavily armed sisters had a lone mountain man surrounded. This is a story of blood, stolen gold, and a fatal attraction. The winter of 1883 did not merely fall upon the Bitterroot Mountains of the Montana Territory, it attacked. It was a season of historical brutality, a relentless whiteout that froze cattle standing up and buried homesteads under 10 feet of snow. Up near the jagged spine of Lolo Pass, Owen Caldwell sought no company and expected none. Owen was a mountain man by trade and a recluse by necessity. Following a brutal stint as a tracker during the Nez Perce War, he had retreated from the world of men, carving out an existence in a fortified, sprawling barn that served as both his home and a sanctuary for his livestock. Built from massive, hand-hewn lodgepole pines and backed directly into the granite face of the mountain, the structure was built to withstand the end of the world. On the night of December 14th, the wind was screaming like a dying animal. Owen sat near the massive iron stove in the center of the main floor, the heavy scent of wood smoke, tanned hides, and sweet hay thick in the air. He was oiling his Winchester 1873 rifle, his calloused thumbs working the lever with practiced ease. He was a large man, hardened by the elements, with a thick beard and eyes the color of chipped flint. Then he heard it. It was faint at first, easily mistaken for the wind tearing at the eaves. But Owen knew the sounds of the mountain. It was the frantic, panicked whinny of a horse. He stood, his hand instinctively dropping to the heavy bone-handled hunting knife at his belt. He moved to the heavy oak doors, unbarring the thick iron latch. As he pulled one door open against the fury of the gale, a wall of white snow blasted into the barn. Through the blinding swirl, 3 figures stumbled inside, dragging 2 exhausted, frost-rimed horses behind them. Owen slammed the door shut, barring it against the storm, and turned to face the intruders. They collapsed onto the packed dirt floor, coughing and violently shivering. They were covered head to toe in heavy buffalo coats and thick woolen scarves. But as the snow began to melt in the warmth of the barn, Owen realized they were women. "Get them to the fire," the tallest of the 3 gasped, her voice ragged. She pulled her scarf down, revealing a face striking in its sharp, aristocratic beauty, though her lips were blue with cold. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead. Owen did not hesitate. The code of the mountains demanded hospitality, even to strangers. He grabbed heavy wool blankets from a nearby trunk and threw them over the women. He dragged the 2 remaining horses to empty stalls, throwing them handfuls of oats. When he returned to the stove, the 3 women had shed their heavy coats. That was when Owen saw the leather gun belts strapped to their waists, the holstered Colt revolvers, and the heavy, iron-bound lockbox the youngest was clutching to her chest like a newborn child. "Warm yourselves," Owen said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He kept his hands away from his sides, his eyes cataloguing every detail. "Coffee's on the stove. There's a tin cup on the barrel. The middle sister, a woman with fiery red hair and eyes that darted around the barn with a wild, feral energy, stood up. She didn't reach for the coffee. She reached for her revolver. The metallic click of the hammer being cocked echoed loudly in the cavernous space. "Step back, mister," she snapped, leveling the barrel at Owen's chest. "Hands where I can see them." "Abigail, put it down," the tall, dark-haired leader said, though she made no move to physically stop her sister. "He's alone, Cora," Abigail replied, her breathing shallow and fast. "We don't know who he is. We secure the perimeter. That's what we agreed." Owen didn't flinch. He looked at the gun, then at the woman holding it. "If I wanted you dead, little girl, I'd have left the door barred. You'd be ice blocks by morning. Now put the iron away before you hurt yourself." The youngest sister, barely out of her teens, with wide, terrified brown eyes, clutched the heavy lockbox tighter. "Abby, please, he saved us." Her name was Josephine, and the sheer weight of the box seemed to be pulling her down into the floorboards. Cora stepped forward. She possessed a terrifying, calm authority. She placed a gloved hand on Abigail's wrist and slowly pushed the gun down. But as she did, she drew her own weapon with blinding speed, stepping directly into Owen's personal space. The scent of freezing rain and sweat radiated from her. She pressed the cold steel barrel of her Colt directly beneath Owen's jaw, forcing his chin up. "Don't mistake our desperation for weakness," Cora whispered, her voice a velvety threat. Her dark eyes bore into his, searching for fear. "There are 3 of us, and 1 of you, and we have nothing left to lose." Owen stared down at her, acutely aware of the pulse beating against the muzzle of her gun. 3 half-frozen women, and a box of trouble, he rumbled calmly. Cora leaned in closer, her breath brushing his cheek. "Think you can survive us all?" "I've survived worse," Owen replied, holding her gaze. "But if you pull that trigger, the fire goes out, the horses die, and you won't survive the night." Your move. A tense silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the crackle of burning pine and the howling wind outside. Slowly, Cora lowered the hammer and holstered her weapon. The first battle was over, but the war inside the barn had just begun. The immediate threat of death gave way to the agonizing process of thawing out. Owen moved around the barn with deliberate slowness, aware that Abigail's hand rarely strayed from the butt of her revolver. He brought them hot coffee laced with a heavy pour of rye whiskey, and set to work rubbing down their exhausted horses. As the ice melted from their clothes and the color returned to their cheeks, the pieces of the puzzle began to snap together in Owen's mind. He had been down to the settlement in Missoula 3 weeks prior for supplies. The saloons were buzzing with a single electrifying piece of news. A Pinkerton-guarded stagecoach carrying the monthly payroll for William Andrews Clark, one of the wealthiest copper barons in the Montana Territory, had been ambushed just south of Butte. The guards were shot, and $50,000 in untraceable gold eagles vanished into the rugged terrain. The whisper on the wind, the rumor that made hardened lawmen nervous, was that the job hadn't been pulled by road agents or seasoned outlaws. It was pulled by their Montgomery sisters. Owen finished brushing a roan mare and walked back to the center of the barn, leaning his forearms against the top rail of a stall. Josephine had set the lockbox down on a heavy oak table. It bore the heavy brass stamp of the Wells Fargo Company. "You're a long way from Butte," Owen observed, breaking the long silence. Cora's head snapped up. She was sitting near the stove, brushing the tangles out of her dark hair. Abigail jumped to her feet, her hand instantly dropping to her gun. "What do you know about Butte?" Abigail hissed. "I know William Andrews Clark is a man who doesn't forgive and doesn't forget," Owen said, stepping fully into the light. "I know he hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency to hunt down the ghosts who took his payroll. And I know that box sitting on my table is heavy enough to hold about 50,000 in gold." Josephine let out a small, terrified gasp and backed away from the table. Cora didn't draw her gun this time. She stood up, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowing. "You're a smart man, Mr. Caldwell." "Owen." "Well, Mr. Caldwell, sometimes smart men talk too much." Cora walked toward him, the heavy leather of her boots thudding softly against the dirt floor. "My name is Cora Montgomery. These are my sisters. We didn't choose to come to your mountain. The blizzard forced our hand. We just need to wait out the storm, and then we'll be gone." "With Pinkertons breathing down your necks," Owen countered. "They won't stop at the foothills. They'll track you through the snow. And when they find you here, they'll assume I'm harboring you. They'll hang me from the rafters of my own barn right beside you." "Nobody followed us," Abigail interjected, pacing nervously. "We covered our tracks. We rode up the frozen creek beds. There's a man working for the Pinkertons named Charlie Siringo," Owen said, his voice dropping an octave. "He doesn't track hoofprints. He tracks mistakes. And riding into a high-altitude blizzard with 50 pounds of gold on exhausted mounts is a mistake." Cora stepped closer to Owen. The tension between them was palpable, a crackling wire of distrust, mutual respect, and an undeniable, forbidden undercurrent of attraction. She was a woman who had fought for everything she had, leading her sisters through a violent, male-dominated world. Owen was an immovable object, a man of the earth. "If we leave now, we die," Cora said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper meant only for him. "If we stay, maybe the Pinkertons come, maybe they don't. But I swear to you, Owen Caldwell, if you try to turn us out, I will kill you myself." Owen looked down at her. She was formidable. "I won't turn you out. The mountain rules say I shelter you. But you don't give the orders here, Cora. You holster your weapons and you help with the chores. We survive the storm together, or we bury each other in the snow." A long beat passed. Cora stared into his flint-colored eyes, searching for deceit. Finding none, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. Fine. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological tension. The blizzard raged outside, a white wall of screaming wind that buried the barn doors under 6 feet of snow. They were entombed together. Owen found himself intensely drawn to Cora. She was ruthless, yes, but fiercely protective of her younger sisters. They worked side by side. As they chopped firewood from the indoor stockpile, their hands would brush, lingering a second too long. In the dim lantern light, Owen watched the sweat gleam on her collarbone, feeling a long dormant heat stirring in his chest. On the third night, a crisis forced their hand. Abigail, driven half-mad by cabin fever and the fear of the impending Pinkertons, decided she wanted to open the box to count the gold. Owen warned her the lock mechanism was rigged. He had seen Wells Fargo boxes like it before. They contained a glass vial of acid designed to destroy paper money, or in this case, a small blasting cap meant to maim whoever forced the lock. Abigail ignored him, taking a heavy iron crowbar to the hasp. Owen lunged across the room, tackling Abigail to the dirt, just as the rudimentary trap snapped, showering the wall with a blast of sparks and a deafening crack. In the scuffle, a piece of shrapnel sliced a deep gash across Owen's shoulder. Abigail lay pinned under him, hyperventilating. Cora rushed over, pulling Abigail away and kneeling beside Owen. "You fool," Cora hissed at her sister. "You nearly killed us all." Cora helped Owen up, leading him to a chair. She grabbed a clean rag and a bottle of rye. "Take your shirt off," she ordered. Owen obeyed, shrugging off his heavy flannel. His torso was a map of old scars, bullet wounds, and knife slashes from a violent past he rarely spoke of. Cora poured the stinging alcohol over the wound. Owen didn't make a sound, but his jaw clenched. Cora's hands were remarkably gentle as she bound his shoulder with cloth. She leaned in close, the scent of her hair filling his senses. She looked at his scars, her fingers lightly tracing a jagged line across his ribs. "You fought a lot of wars, Owen," she murmured, her eyes lifting to meet his. "Only the ones I had to," he replied, his voice a rough rumble. "Are you going to fight us?" she asked softly. "I haven't decided yet," he whispered back. By the fifth day, the howling wind finally began to die down, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. The snow had stopped, but they were walled in, cut off from the world. The enforced isolation acted as a pressure cooker. That evening, the temperature inside the barn plummeted as the fire burned low. Owen climbed up the heavy wooden ladder to the sprawling hayloft to throw down more feed for the horses. The loft was dark, smelling of dry grass and old dust. A moment later, he heard the creak of the ladder. Cora climbed up into the loft, carrying a solitary kerosene lantern. The golden light danced across her face, softening her sharp features. She set the lantern down on a barrel and walked over to where Owen stood, holding a pitchfork. "Abby and Joe are asleep," she said quietly. "You should be too," Owen replied, leaning on the pitchfork. "I can't sleep," Cora admitted, taking a step closer. The bravado, the ruthless leader persona, seemed to melt away in the shadows of the loft. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the Pinkertons. I see the gallows in Helena." "You shouldn't have stolen Clark's money," Owen said plainly. "We didn't have a choice," Cora fired back, her voice tinged with sudden emotion. "Clark's mining company took our family's land down in Anaconda. They cheated our father, drove him to an early grave. We didn't steal that gold, Owen. We took back what was owed to us. We're going to California to start over." She was standing very close now. Owen could see the vulnerability she hid from her sisters, the sheer exhaustion of carrying the weight of their survival. "California's a long ride," he said softly. Cora looked up at him, her dark eyes shimmering in the lantern light. "Come with us." Owen froze. "I'm a mountain man, Cora. I don't do well in cities, and I don't run from the law." "You wouldn't have to run," she whispered, reaching out to rest her hand against his chest, right over his beating heart. "You're strong, Owen. You know the trails. With you, we could make it. And I want you to come." The raw, desperate honesty in her voice shattered the last of Owen's defenses. He dropped the pitchfork. His large, rough hands came up to cup her face. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch. Owen closed the distance, pressing his lips to hers. It started as a hesitant, questioning kiss, but ignited instantly into a fierce, passionate inferno. It was a collision of two lonely, hardened souls seeking warmth in a freezing world. They sank into the soft hay, lost in a desperate embrace, their bodies tangling together, escaping the reality of the stolen gold, the bitter cold, and the hangman's noose. For a few stolen hours in the dark loft, there were no outlaws and no mountain men, only Owen and Cora. But reality in the Montana Territory was cruel and unforgiving. Dawn broke with a blinding glare as sunlight reflected off the fresh snow outside. Down below, Josephine had woken early to find more firewood. She wandered over to a heavy wooden trunk near Owen's bedroll, looking for kindling. The lid was slightly ajar. Curiosity getting the better of her, Joe lifted the lid. Inside, beneath folded wool blankets, lay a heavy, brass-bound ledger and a stack of papers. She pulled out the top paper. It was a telegraph printout, dated 3 weeks ago, from the Territorial Marshal's office. It offered a $5,000 bounty on the Montgomery sisters. Beneath it lay an intricate set of Pinkerton tracking maps and a tarnished silver badge that read, U.S. Deputy Marshal, Special Tracker Division. Joe gasped, dropping the papers. The noise echoed in the quiet barn. Up in the loft, Owen jolted awake. He recognized the sound of his trunk slamming shut. He looked at Cora, who was just waking up beside him, and felt a cold stone drop in his gut. Owen, Cora murmured sleepily. Before Owen could speak, Abigail's voice rang out from the floor below, shrill and filled with murderous rage. Cora, get down here, now! Owen and Cora scrambled down the ladder. Abigail was standing in the center of the room, her Colt revolver aimed squarely at Owen's chest. Joe was crying, clutching the deputy badge and the wanted poster. Cora stopped at the bottom of the ladder, looking from the badge in Joe's hand to Owen. The warmth that had been in her eyes just an hour ago vanished, replaced by an icy, absolute betrayal. You, Cora whispered, her voice trembling with fury. You're a bounty hunter. I was a tracker, Owen said, keeping his hands visible, stepping slowly toward them. I quit 3 years ago, Cora. They send those bounties to everyone who used to ride for the marshal. I swear to you, I didn't know who you were until you walked through that door. Liar, Abigail screamed, cocking the hammer of her gun. He was keeping us here, waiting for the snow to clear so he could hand us over. Cora, look at me, Owen pleaded, locking eyes with her. If I wanted the bounty, I would have taken you the first night. I could have killed you in your sleep. I didn't. What happened up in that loft? That was real. Cora's face was a mask of agony. She drew her own gun, pointing it at Owen. The woman who had just lain in his arms was now ready to end his life. Pack the horses, Abby, Cora ordered, her voice dead and hollow. We're leaving. We can't just leave him, Abby argued. He'll follow us. I said pack the horses, Cora roared. Before Abby could move, a new sound cut through the tense air. It wasn't the wind. It was a heavy, rhythmic thudding coming from outside the thick barn doors. Then the deep, baying bark of a bloodhound. Owen's blood ran cold. He knew that sound. A voice, booming and authoritative, echoed from the other side of the heavy oak doors. Owen Caldwell, this is Sheriff John X. Beadler and the Pinkerton Agency. We tracked the Clark gold to your door. Send the Montgomery women out with their hands up, or we'll burn this barn to the ground with all of you inside. The sisters froze, terror washing over them. They were trapped. The booming voice of Sheriff John X. Beadler echoed through the heavy timber walls of the barn, an acoustic nightmare that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of their bones. Beadler was a legend in the Montana Territory, but not the kind they wrote dime novels about. He was a ruthless enforcer, a former vigilante who had hanged men from meat hooks in Virginia's city without so much as a whisper of a trial. If he was riding with Pinkerton's, William Andrews Clark had spared absolutely no expense. It meant this was not an arrest. It was an execution. Inside, the silence that followed Beadler's ultimatum was absolute, save for the panicked snorting of the horses in their stalls. The air had turned to ice. Abigail's hands were shaking so violently that the barrel of her Colt rattled against the brass button of Owen's shirt. "You set us up," she wept, her voice cracking under the terror. "You sent a telegraph before the storm. You brought them right to us." "I haven't been to a telegraph office in 3 months, Abby," Owen said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He didn't look at the gun. He looked directly into Cora's eyes. "Listen to me, Cora. You know Beidler's reputation. He doesn't take prisoners. If you walk out those doors with your hands up, they will gun you down in the snow and tell the territorial governor you resisted. They don't want a trial. Clark wants a message sent." Cora's dark eyes were unreadable, a tempest of betrayal and survival instinct. She glanced down at the U.S. Deputy Marshal badge gleaming in Josephine's trembling hand, then back up at the man who had held her in the dark just hours before. "Why should I believe a single word out of your mouth?" Cora hissed, stepping closer, her own revolver aimed at his chest. "You slept in my arms while a posse rode to slaughter my family. Because if I wanted you dead, I'd step aside and let Beadler do the work," Owen fired back, his tone hardening. "And because I know a way out of here. But you have to trust me, Cora. Right now. You have 10 seconds before they start throwing kerosene on the roof." "Don't listen to him, Cora," Abigail cried. "Shoot him. We take the gold and make a run for the tree line. In 3 feet of fresh powder? With a bloodhound on your scent and 10 Winchester rifles aimed at the door?" Owen shook his head slowly. "You wouldn't make it 10 yards. Outside, the heavy thud-thud-thud of boots tramping through the snow grew louder. A new sound joined the wind, the distinct, sickening slosh of liquid hitting the heavy oak doors. "Time's up, Caldwell," Beidler roared from the other side of the wood. "I'm striking the match." Cora looked at Abigail, then at the terrified Josephine, clutching the heavy lockbox. The ruthless outlaw leader faded, leaving only a desperate sister trying to keep her blood alive. She lowered her gun. "Show us," Cora commanded, her voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "If this is a trap, Owen, I will put a bullet through your spine before I die. I swear it to God." "Understood," Owen said, He moved with sudden, explosive speed. He didn't go for his rifle. Instead, he sprinted toward the rear of the cavernous barn, past the horse stalls, toward a massive, floor-to-ceiling grain silo built directly against the sheer granite face of the mountain. "Bring the horses, saddle them now," Owen barked over his shoulder. As the sisters frantically tightened the cinches on their mounts, Owen grabbed a heavy iron crowbar from his workbench. The barn hadn't just been built against the mountain, it had been built over a piece of it. Years ago, prospectors had blasted a silver drift, a horizontal mining tunnel, straight through the ridge, searching for a vein that never materialized. Owen had built his sanctuary over the entrance, utilizing the constant 50-degree draft from the tunnel to keep his livestock alive during brutal winters. He wedged the crowbar under the massive timber base of the silo and heaved. The veins in his neck bulged as he threw his entire back into the effort. Slowly, with a deafening groan of wood against stone, the false wall slid aside on hidden iron casters, revealing a pitch-black, timber-shored tunnel plunging directly into the heart of the mountain. A faint wisp of smoke suddenly drifted down from the rafters. Outside, the orange glow of fire began to lick at the edges of the high windows. The posse had lit the roof. "Get them in," Owen shouted, coughing as the smoke began to thicken. Abigail and Josephine led their horses into the terrifying darkness of the tunnel. Josephine was sobbing, clutching the heavy Wells Fargo lockbox to her chest. Cora stood at the threshold, her horse's reins in one hand, her colt in the other. She looked back at Owen, who was sprinting back toward his workbench. "What are you doing?" Cora screamed over the roaring crackle of the flames above them. "Owen, come on." "I need to buy us a lead," he yelled back. Owen grabbed a heavy canvas sack of black powder he used for reloading shotgun shells and a coil of waterproof fuse. He ran to the center of the room, right beneath the main support beam, and dumped the powder into an empty iron kettle, burying the fuse deep within the volatile gray dust. He struck a match against the heel of his boot, touched it to the fuse, and watched it hiss to life. A sparking, violent snake of fire. The heat in the barn was becoming unbearable. The front doors were entirely engulfed, the heavy oak blistering and turning black. Owen turned and sprinted for the tunnel. He hit the threshold just as the roof timbers began to groan under the fire. He grabbed the heavy iron handle of the silo wall and heaved it shut behind him, plunging them into absolute darkness just as a deafening, concussive roar shook the mountain. The iron kettle detonated. The shockwave slammed against the false wall, throwing Owen forward into Cora. The blast blew the burning front doors of the barn outward in a shower of splintered wood and fire, hurling Badler's posse backward into the snow and filling the clearing with a blinding, impenetrable cloud of black smoke and ash. In the suffocating dark of the tunnel, Owen scrambled to his feet, pulling Cora up with him. "Light a lantern," Owen ordered, his ears ringing violently. "Keep your heads low. The air is bad." A match flared, and Abigail lit a kerosene lantern. The dim golden light revealed the claustrophobic nightmare they were in. The tunnel was barely wide enough for the horses, the ceiling held up by rotting, century-old lodgepole pines. Water dripped from the granite walls, pooling in the muddy floor. "How long is this shaft?" Cora asked, her voice trembling slightly as she checked her horse. "Quarter of a mile," Owen replied, taking the lead. "It dumps out on the west face, overlooking a ravine. The storm dropped enough snow to cover our tracks once we hit the tree line. We ride for the Idaho border." They moved in agonizingly slow procession. The heavy scent of ancient earth, bat guano, and fear choked them. Josephine walked in the center, weeping silently, the 50-pound lockbox strapped securely to her horse's saddle. Owen kept his Winchester unslung, his eyes scanning the oppressive darkness ahead. Every dripping rock sounded like a footstep. Every groan of the rotting timbers sounded like the mountain preparing to swallow them whole. But for 30 grueling minutes, they met no resistance. Finally, a pinprick of blinding white light pierced the gloom ahead. The exit. Owen raised a hand, signaling them to stop. He crept forward, pressing his back against the damp granite. The exit was blocked by heavy, slatted wooden boards, designed to keep snow out of the shaft. Owen peered through the slats. The blizzard had completely broken. The sky was a piercing, crystalline blue, and the snowpack was a blinding white ocean reflecting the midday sun. The ravine sloped downward, thick with ponderosa pines. It was the perfect escape route. Owen pushed the heavy wooden slats outward. They creaked loudly, tumbling into the snow. The frigid mountain air rushed into the tunnel, sweet and pure. Owen stepped out into the knee-deep snow, his rifle lowered. "Clear," he called back. Cora led her horse out, followed by Abigail and Josephine. They squinted against the brutal glare of the sun, taking deep, ragged breaths of the cold air. They had made it. The gold was safe. They had survived. "That's far enough, ladies." The voice was smooth, cultured, and entirely devoid of warmth. It came from above them. Owen's blood turned to ice. He whipped his rifle upward. Standing on a rock outcropping 20 yards above the tunnel exit, perfectly positioned, with the sun at his back, was a man in a heavy, fur-lined coat. He wore a silver Pinkerton badge pinned to his lapel, and he held a Winchester repeater resting casually on his hip. It was Charlie Siringo, the wolf himself. Siringo didn't look like a killer. He looked like a frontier gentleman with a neatly trimmed mustache and calm, dead eyes. But Owen knew the truth. Siringo didn't chase men. He mathematically calculated their demise. "I have to admit, Caldwell, the explosive diversion was a magnificent touch," Siringo called down, his voice carrying easily on the crisp air. "Badler is likely digging his own men out of the burning wreckage as we speak. But you see, while Badler plays the butcher, I play the board. A fortified position against a mountain always has a back door." "Drop the rifle, Siringo," Owen shouted, leveling his Winchester at the man's chest. "You're outmanned." "Am I?" Siringo chuckled dryly. He didn't flinch. "I see 3 exhausted women, a heavy box of Mr. Clark's property, and a disgraced tracker playing white knight. I am holding the high ground, the sun is in your eyes, and I only need 1 bullet to hit that lockbox to scatter $50,000 into the ravine. You'll spend the rest of your short lives digging for it before Badler arrives." Abigail panicked. She drew her Colt, pointing it wildly toward the ridge. "I'll kill you. I'll kill you where you stand." "Abby, no!" Cora screamed. The crack of Siringo's Winchester was deafening. He didn't aim for Abigail. He aimed for the horse carrying the gold. The bullet struck the earth inches from Josephine's boots, sending up a geyser of ice and rock. Joe screamed, falling backward into the snow. The horse reared, panicked, yanking its reins from Joe's grip and bolting sideways toward the steep edge of the ravine. Chaos erupted. Owen didn't hesitate. He knew Siringo's next shot would be for the terrified girl on the ground. Owen lunged forward, throwing his massive frame over Josephine, just as Siringo worked the lever and fired again. A sickening thwack echoed off the mountain. Owen grunted, his body seizing violently as a .44 caliber slug tore through his right shoulder, dangerously close to his collarbone, spinning him into the deep snow. Owen! Cora's scream tore from her throat. The hesitation vanished. The ruthless leader who had planned the Butte robbery took over. Cora drew both of her revolvers with lightning speed. She didn't fire blindly. She dropped to one knee, ignoring the blinding sun, and unleashed a rapid, devastating fan of covering fire directly at the rock outcropping. Her bullets shattered the granite around Siringo, showering him with lethal stone shrapnel. Siringo cursed, forced to dive backward behind the boulder to avoid having his head taken off. "Abby, get the horse! Joe, get up!" Cora barked, her voice cracking like a whip. She fired twice more to keep Siringo pinned, then scrambled through the snow to where Owen lay. Blood was already blooming through Owen's heavy coat, a stark, terrifying crimson against the white powder. He was pale, his teeth gritted in agony, but his eyes were entirely lucid. He was trying to push himself up with his good arm. "I've got you," Cora gasped, wrapping her arms under his heavy shoulders and dragging him behind the thick trunk of a fallen pine tree. "Keep pressure on it. Keep pressure on it." She ripped her woolen scarf from her neck and jammed it hard against the entry wound. Owen let out a low, guttural groan, his head falling back against the bark. Down the slope, Abigail had managed to tackle the reins of the panicked horse, dragging it and the heavy lockbox back to the safety of the tree line. They were out of Siringo's line of sight, but they were trapped on the slope. "He's going to flank us," Owen wheezed, his breathing shallow. "Siringo won't wait. He'll circle the ridge, try to shoot down into the trees. Then we leave right now," Cora said, her hands slick with his blood. She looked up at Abigail. "Get his horse. We're loading him up." "No," Owen growled, grabbing her wrist with a weak but iron grip. "I'm bleeding too heavy. I'll slow you down. The posse heard the shots. Beidler will be cresting that ridge in 10 minutes. If you try to drag me, you all hang." "I am not leaving you," Cora snarled, tears finally breaking through her hardened facade, freezing instantly on her cheeks. "You took a bullet for my sister. You saved our lives. I am not letting you die in the snow." Owen looked into her eyes, seeing the desperate, beautiful woman who had sought shelter in his storm. He reached up with his bloodied hand, gently touching her cheek. "You told me you were going to California," Owen whispered. "You take the gold. You take your sisters. You ride the creek beds so you don't leave tracks, and you don't stop until you smell the ocean." "Owen, please," Josephine sobbed from behind them. "Listen to me," Owen commanded, forcing his voice to stay steady. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his Winchester. He shoved it into Cora's hands. "I know this mountain. I know every rock and every tree. I can hold Siringo and Bidler off long enough for you to vanish, but you have to go. Now, Cora stared at him, her heart shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She was a thief, a survivor, a woman who had broken every rule of a man's world to protect her blood. But leaving the man she loved to die alone in the cold was a crime she couldn't stomach. Suddenly, the crunch of snow echoed from the ridge above. Siringo was moving. "Go!" Owen roared, a terrifying primal sound that echoed through the pines. Cora leaned down, pressing her lips to his with a desperate, crushing intensity. It was a kiss of blood, tears, and absolute finality. She pulled away, leaving a smear of red on his cheek. "If you survive this, Owen Caldwell," she whispered fiercely, "you look for the Montgomery sisters in San Francisco. You hear me?" "Ride," was all he said. Cora stood. She didn't look back. She grabbed the reins of her horse, commanded her sisters, and the three women vanished into the dense, snow-laden pines. A fortune in gold strapped to their saddles, disappearing like ghosts into the wild territory. Owen was alone. He leaned heavily against the fallen pine, his breathing ragged. The pain in his shoulder was a blinding, white-hot fire, but the cold was slowly beginning to numb it. He painstakingly pulled a handful of extra cartridges from his pocket and laid them on the log in front of him. He picked up his Colt revolver, his thumb cocking the hammer. Up on the ridge, Charlie Siringo stepped out from behind the boulders, his rifle raised, scanning the tree line. Moments later, the exhausted, soot-stained forms of Sheriff Bidler and 5 deputies crested the hill behind him. Owen took a deep breath of the freezing air. He looked west, toward the invisible border, toward the ocean he would likely never see. A grim, bloody smile touched his lips. He raised his revolver, resting it against the bark of the pine, and aimed squarely at the silver badge on Siringo's chest. "Let's dance," Owen whispered. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the Bitterroot Mountains, a final, thunderous defiance against the dying of the light. Did Owen's final stand give the Montgomery sisters enough time to reach California, or did the brutal mountain claim another life? If this Wild West tale of stolen gold, betrayal, and sacrifice kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button, share this video with a fellow history buff, and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment below. Would you have stayed behind, or would you have ridden for the coast?